Minutes before my son's wedding, my future daughter-in-law slammed a thick folder onto the VIP room table and said, "Sign your house over to me now or the wedding is off." Then my son stepped beside her and warned, "And if you refuse, I'll tell all 500 guests you're the one who destroyed my wedding." I looked at them quietly, closed the folder, picked up my coat, and walked out. 7 days later, their perfect life began falling apart. If something in those first few minutes already made your blood boil, you're exactly where you need to be. Subscribe and tell me in the comments. Where in the world are you watching this city-state country? Let's see how far this reaches. Some details in this story have been shaped for storytelling and educational purposes. Similarities to any names or locations are coincidental. But what this story has to say, that part is worth every minute. The room smelled of gardenias and something else underneath, something sharper, like ambition with nowhere left to hide. I had been sitting in the VIP waiting room of Rosewood Estate for 12 minutes, straightening my tie and thinking about Margaret, when the door swung open without a knock. Brecken Cole walked in. My son's bride-to-be. 32 years old, sharp jaw eyes that calculated the room before her feet had fully crossed the threshold. She was still in her preparation robe, hair already pinned, and she was carrying a manila folder about 2 inches thick. She set it on the table in front of me like she was filing a motion in court. I looked at the folder. I did not touch it. "Let's skip the pleasantries," Brecken said. 500 people are sitting in that hall right now. The string quartet has been playing the same 3 songs on rotation for 20 minutes. Everyone's wondering where the groom's father is. She sat down across from me, crossed her legs, and smiled the way a person smiles when they've already decided how a conversation ends. "I've been patient with you, Raymond. Genuinely patient. But today is the day we settle things." "Settle what things?" I asked. She tapped the folder. "The Monterey House. Sign it over today before the ceremony, and everything goes forward the way it should. You walk your son down that aisle, you sit in the front row, you cry when the vows happen. Normal family stuff." My chest tightened, but I kept my face the way I'd kept it through 40 years of business still open, giving nothing away. "And if I don't," Brecken leaned forward, "then I walk out of this room, tell Callum the wedding is off, and let 500 guests draw their own conclusions about which family member couldn't support his son's happiness." Her voice dropped to something smooth and final. "You'll be the man who destroyed his son's wedding, Raymond. People don't forget that." The door opened behind her. Callum stepped in, my boy. My 36-year-old boy in a navy wedding suit that fit him perfectly, standing behind his bride with his arms crossed and his gaze fixed somewhere above my left ear. My heart cracked down the middle, not from surprise, but from recognition. I had been hoping, even in that moment, that he had wandered in to stop this, that some version of the son I raised was still in there somewhere. "Callum," I said. Just his name. A question wrapped inside it. He exhaled through his nose. "Just sign the papers, Dad. It's one signature. You're making this into something it doesn't have to be." "You know what's in this folder?" I asked him. "It's the house. She wants the house in her name before the wedding. It's important to her." He shifted his weight. "Is it really worth blowing up the whole day over a piece of real estate?" Something inside me went very, very quiet. Not peaceful the way a field goes quiet right before a storm rolls in. "Callum," I said, keeping my voice steady even as my hands gripped the arms of the chair. "Look me in the eye and tell me this was your idea." He looked at the window instead. Outside, California sunshine poured over the vineyards like nothing in the world was wrong. Brecken spoke before he could. "It doesn't matter whose idea it was. What matters is that we're asking you for one thing. One, And you're sitting there like we've asked you to sign away your soul. You may have, I said. She blinked. That landed somewhere. I stood up slowly. My knees reminded me I was 69 years old, and I picked up the folder from the table. Not to sign it, because I was not about to leave 2 inches of documents in this woman's hands. Where are you going? Brecken's voice finally cracked just slightly at the edges. I told you what happens if you walk out of here. I looked at her. Then I looked at my son, really looked at him the way a father looks when he is memorizing something he knows he is about to lose. Callum, I said, I love you. I have loved you since the moment you existed, but I will not be signing anything today. Callum's jaw tightened. His eyes finally met mine, and what I saw there was not hatred. It was worse than hatred. It was the flat, practiced look of someone who had already moved on. Then don't. But don't expect us to pretend this didn't happen. My throat burned. My eyes stung in that particular way they do when a man who has not cried in public since his wife's funeral is working hard not to cry right now. I nodded once, turned, and walked to the door. This is a mistake, Brecken called after me. You are making the worst mistake of your life. I paused with my hand on the doorframe. I've made a few of those, I said. I always survived them. I walked out into the carpeted hallway of Rosewood Estate, past the framed vineyard photographs, past a young woman in a headset who asked if I needed anything, and out through the side door into the afternoon sun. The parking lot was quiet on this side. My Ford F-150 sat where I'd left it, dusty from the drive down the coast, looking absolutely ordinary next to a row of luxury sedans. I walked to it, set the folder on the passenger seat, and took out my phone. Thaddeus Mercer, my attorney, my friend of 27 years, picked up on the second ring. Thaddeus, I said. My voice came out rough around the edges, so I cleared my throat and tried again. Freeze everything. The guarantees, the financial accounts, the vehicle leases, all of it. Effective right now. Let them live on what they actually earn. A beat of silence. Then Raymond, are you certain? From inside Rosewood Estate, muffled by walls and distance, I heard the string quartet shift into a processional. The ceremony was starting. I'm certain, I said. Then it's done, Thaddeus said. Are you all right? I looked at the folder on the passenger seat. 2 inches thick. I hadn't even opened it yet. Ask me tomorrow, I said, and I hung up. I sat in my truck for 22 minutes. Not because I had nowhere to go. I had plenty of places to go. I sat there because I needed to know what they would do next. And because, if I am being honest, part of me was still waiting for Callum to come running through those glass doors, tie-loosened face flushed, saying he had made a mistake. He did not come. At the 3-minute mark, through the tall windows of Rosewood Estate's main hall, I watched the procession begin. Bridesmaids in dusty rows, groomsmen in matching navy. Then Brecken, radiant and composed, on the arm of a man I didn't recognize, her uncle, I assumed, walking down the aisle toward my son. My son, who was standing at the altar waiting for her with a smile on his face. My hands tightened on the steering wheel until my knuckles went pale. I made myself let go. A tap on the passenger window made me turn. Desmond Grant stood outside, mid-40s, broad shoulders, the kind of face that had seen enough of other people's important days to be unshockable. He managed Rosewood Estate and had for 15 years. I had met him a long time ago under circumstances I'll get to later, and he was one of the few people in that building who knew exactly what I was doing in a parking lot during what was supposed to be my son's ceremony. I rolled down the window. Mr. Hale, he said, keeping his voice low. You doing all right out here? I've had better Saturdays, I said. He nodded slowly, like that was a reasonable answer. I just want you to know the room. Whatever was said in there today, our entrance mic system runs continuous. He paused. Let that sit. I'm not saying anything beyond that right now. Just wanted you to know. Before I could ask him what he meant, his radio crackled. He pressed it, gave a short acknowledgement, and straightened up. You need anything, you know where to find me. He walked back toward the entrance. I sat with that for a moment. The entrance mic system runs continuous, and filed it somewhere in the back of my mind, where I keep things that will matter later. My phone buzzed. A text from a man named Gerald Whitmore, an old friend who had known Margaret and me since our 30s, now sitting somewhere in that hall in a good suit. The message read, Raymond, what happened, Callum just told everyone you left because you couldn't accept the marriage. People are talking. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time. Couldn't accept the marriage. My chest felt like someone had their fist wrapped around my ribs and was slowly tightening their grip. Callum had stood at that altar in front of 500 people, business associates, family, friends, neighbors we'd known for decades, and turned me into the obstacle, the difficult father, the man who couldn't let go. I typed back, oh, I'm fine. Enjoy the reception. I put the phone face down on the dash. Then I opened the folder. The first 3 pages were what Brecken had described a property transfer document for the Monterey house. I skimmed past those. Page 4 stopped me cold. It was a financial power of attorney, broad sweeping language that would give the named recipient authority over my banking accounts, my investment portfolios, and any financial decisions I was deemed unable to make myself. Page 9 added management rights to Hale Property Group's board votes. Page 14 named Brecken Cole as the authorized agent for all asset dispositions in the event that I was found to lack, and I am quoting here sufficient cognitive capacity as determined by a physician of the agent's choosing. A physician of the agent's choosing. Not my doctor. Not a court-appointed evaluator. Whoever Brecken selected. My hands were trembling by page 20. Not from fear. From something closer to fury, the cold, deliberate kind that doesn't raise its voice. I had 40 years of practice at that particular feeling. I drove north on Highway 1 until I found a coffee shop in a small beach town, the kind with mismatched chairs and a handwritten menu on a chalkboard. I took a corner table and ordered black coffee and spread the folder out in front of me. By the time I reached page 47, I had stopped trembling entirely. Page 47 was the one that changed everything. At the bottom of the page in the signature block labeled Witness and co-recipient of management authority was Callum's signature. Dated 3 weeks ago. Not today. Not in the heat of a pressured moment. 3 weeks ago, my son had sat down somewhere at a desk at a kitchen table, wherever it was, and signed his name to a document designed to strip me of control over everything I had spent my life building. He had done it calmly, deliberately, with time to think and time to change his mind. He had not changed his mind. I sat with that coffee going cold in front of me, and I thought about the boy I had coached through Little League. The teenager I had stayed up past midnight helping with calculus. The young man I had handed $3 million to because he said he had a dream, and I believed him. I thought about all the times I had stepped back and given him room, and trusted that the values I tried to pass on had taken root somewhere underneath all that ambition. Page 47 told me a different story. I picked up my phone and called Thaddeus. I'm looking at the folder, I said when he answered. Thaddeus Callum signed this. Page 47. He signed it 3 weeks ago. The pause on his end lasted longer than I expected from a man who processed difficult information for a living. Raymond, he said finally, do not read any more of it tonight. Bring it to me. Come to the office tonight. How bad is the rest of it? I think, Thaddeus said carefully, that this is considerably larger than a house. Thaddeus Mercer has kept the same office for 31 years. Same walnut desk. Same leather chairs worn soft at the armrests. Same brass lamp that casts everything in amber. It is the kind of room where bad news lands gently, where the furniture itself seems to absorb some of the shock. That Saturday night, the furniture wasn't enough. I spread the folder across his desk at 9:30 in the evening, and Thaddeus put on his reading glasses and did not say another word for 40 minutes. I watched him work. He read with a red pen in his hand, underlining, circling, occasionally writing a question mark in the margin. His face gave almost nothing away. He had been a litigator for 20 years before moving into trust and estate law, and that background had carved his expressions down to the essentials. But twice in those 40 minutes I saw his jaw tighten, and once near page 30 he exhaled through his nose in the particular thing he did when something genuinely alarmed him. When he finally set the pen down, he took off his glasses and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. "Raymond," he said, "I want you to listen carefully to everything I'm about to tell you, because some of it is going to be difficult to hear." "I've been sitting here watching you read for 40 minutes, I said. "I'm ready." He turned the folder to face me and pointed to page 4. "This is not a property transfer. This is a comprehensive financial power of attorney. If you had signed this, Brecken Cole would have gained immediate authority over your personal banking accounts, your investment portfolios at Merrill and Vanguard, and any financial transaction exceeding $5,000. My throat tightened. "Keep going." Page 9. He turned to it. "This gives her proxy voting rights on your behalf at Hale Property Group board meetings, meaning she could vote your shares. You're controlling shares, Raymond." He looked up at me over the desk. "She could have outvoted you in your own company." I pressed my hand flat on the desk to keep it from shaking. "And page 14, Thaddeus's voice dropped just slightly. "Page 14 establishes Brecken as your authorized agent for all asset dispositions, sales transfers, encumbrances in the event that you are found to lack sufficient cognitive capacity." He paused. "As determined by a physician of the agent's choosing." "Not a court," I said. "Not an independent evaluator. No. Whoever she selects, paid by her, reporting to her." Thaddeus folded his hands on the desk. "Raymond, if you had signed this document, and if she had subsequently produced a cooperative physician willing to certify cognitive decline, and there are physicians willing to do that for the right fee, she would have had legal authority to liquidate your assets, restructure the company, and remove you from your own financial life, potentially within weeks." The amber light from the brass lamp felt suddenly very warm. My chest ached with something I couldn't name precisely, not quite grief, not quite rage, something that lived between the two. "This took months to prepare," I said. "The legal structure, yes. The language is sloppy in places she didn't use a licensed attorney. Some of these clauses wouldn't survive a challenge in court. But the intent is sophisticated. Someone with real financial knowledge helped her understand what to reach for." Thaddeus paused. "Someone who knew exactly which assets existed and where they were held." I had been waiting for him to say it. "Callum. Page 47 confirms it," Thaddeus said. "He signed as witness and co-recipient of management authority 3 weeks ago. Not under pressure, not in the heat of the moment. 3 weeks ago, with time to read every word and time to walk away." He looked at me steadily. "Raymond, your son did not stumble into this. He helped design it." My eyes burned. I will not pretend they didn't. I looked at the ceiling of that amber-lit office, and I breathed through it the way I had breathed through Margaret's diagnosis, through the recession of 2008, through every hard thing a man accumulates over 69 years of living. After a moment, I looked back at Thaddeus. What do we do? I asked. First, we document everything. Thaddeus pulled a legal pad toward him. The folder, the signatures, the dates. I want a chain of custody established tonight. Second, I need you to tell me everything you know about Callum's financial situation. His startup, the $3 million you invested, any accounts you've been guaranteeing. So I told him. All of it. Everything Callum had asked for over the past 2 years. Every favor I had extended. Every guarantee I had quietly signed, so my son's life looked the way he needed it to look. When I finished, Thaddeus had filled 3 pages of his legal pad. Raymond, he said, setting the pen down, I want to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. You've known me 27 years, Thaddeus. When have I been anything else? Did you know this was coming? Not the specifics. In general. Did some part of you know? My voice came out rougher than I intended. Some part of me has been bracing for something for months. I didn't know it would be this. But you brought the folder when you left, he said. You didn't leave it behind. I never leave documents in other people's hands. Thaddeus almost smiled at that. Almost. Then he squared the folder on his desk and said, I need you to bring me one more thing. Lorraine Bennett, your CFO. I think she may have information about the startup accounts that changes the picture significantly. Can you set up a meeting with her first thing Monday? I'll call her tonight. Good. Thaddeus stood buttoning his jacket. Raymond, you did the right thing walking out of that room. I looked at the folder on his desk. At Callum's signature on page 47. My son's handwriting neat and deliberate on the line that would have ended my independence. Ask me again in a few months, I said, when I know how it ends. Lorraine Bennett had been with Hale Property Group for 19 years, and in all that time she had never once called me by my first name in a professional setting. She was formal, the way a good CFO is formal, precise, measured, allergic to anything approximate. When I walked through her office door at 8 o'clock that Monday morning, and she said Raymond instead of Mr. Hale, I knew the numbers were going to hurt. She was already standing when I came in. 3 stacks of printed reports on her desk, 2 monitors glowing with spreadsheets, a coffee cup she clearly hadn't touched. She was in her early 50s, silver-streaked hair pulled back, and she had the expression of a woman who had been up since 5 rehearsing how to say something she did not want to say. Sit down, she said. Please. I sat. How bad? Bad enough that I almost called you Sunday night. She settled into her chair and pulled the first stack toward her. I'm going to walk you through 3 things. The startup investment, the guarantee accounts, and something I found on Friday that I think you need to see last. She looked at me over the top of the papers. Stop me if you need me to slow down. Don't slow down, I said. Lorraine opened the first report. 18 months ago, you transferred $3 million to Callum's startup, Hale Ventures Tech, as a direct investment. The agreed purpose was product development and market expansion. She turned the report to face me. This is where the money actually went. I looked at the column of figures. My stomach dropped. $340,000 to an event planning company. Lorraine said, her voice staying level with visible effort. That's the wedding, Raymond. Flowers venue catering the works. $180,000 in luxury retail clothes, watches, luggage. $600,000 in margin calls on personal brokerage accounts he was making, leveraged stock trades, and losing. $420,000 transferred directly to a personal account to pay down credit lines. And $800,000 what? I asked, even though my voice came out barely above a whisper. Transferred to a shell account that was used to generate fake revenue transactions. Callum's startup has been showing investor presentations with revenue figures that don't correspond to any real sales. She clasped her hands on the desk. He's been fabricating performance metrics to attract outside capital. Raymond, that's securities fraud. The moment an outside investor relies on those numbers and wires money, he's broken federal law. The room felt very still. My jaw ached from how hard I was holding it. The remaining 660,000, I said, scattered across 12 different accounts over 14 months. I'm still tracing it. She paused. I'm sorry. I know this is his startup. I know what you were trying to do for him. Don't apologize, I said. Keep going. Lorraine pulled the second stack over. The guarantee accounts. 14 months ago, you signed a conditional letter of guarantee for Brecken Cole Interiors, Brecken's interior design company. The stated purpose was a bridge loan to support showroom expansion. You signed it because Callum told you she was building something real and needed temporary backing. I remember. What you didn't know is that Brecken used that guarantee as the foundation for 3 separate credit lines totaling $800,000. Lorraine laid 3 bank letters side by side on the desk. First, Pacific Bank Wells Commercial and a private lender out of Palo Alto. The stated purpose on each application was different from the last. The banks accepted them all because Hale Property Group's name was on the guarantee and our name carries weight. She looked at me steadily. Raymond, she told each bank a different story about what the money was for. That's fraud on the lenders, and because our guarantee was attached, it creates exposure for us too. My hands were gripping the arms of the chair hard enough that the leather creaked. I made myself loosen them one finger at a time. You said there were 3 things, I said. What's the last one? Lorraine reached for the third stack, smaller, just a few pages. She didn't hand it to me immediately. 3 months before the wedding, she said. Someone accessed the Hale Property Group document archive using an old employee access code. The code belonged to Callum. He was on staff here briefly in 2021 before he left to start the tech venture. His code was supposed to be deactivated when he departed. She set the pages in front of me. It wasn't. And in March of this year, that code was used to download the complete asset inventory of Hale Property Group. Every property, every account, every trust filing, everything. I looked at the access log. The date March 14th, 11 weeks before the wedding. He gave Brecken the roadmap, I said. That's what the evidence suggests. Lorraine's voice softened just barely. Raymond, I want to ask you something directly. Did you have any indication before the wedding that something like this was being planned? I thought about the honest answer. Then I gave it. I had a feeling, not specifics. A feeling that something was building, and I couldn't quite see the shape of it yet. And you didn't confront him? No, I said. I didn't. Lorraine looked at me for a moment, not with judgment, but with the careful assessment of someone trying to understand the whole picture. What do you need from me now? Everything documented, I said, sitting up straighter. Every transfer, every fabricated revenue entry, every guarantee application with its stated versus actual purpose. I need it clean-sourced and time-stamped. Can you have that ready by the end of the week? I started building the file 3 days ago, Lorraine said. I had a feeling you'd be sitting in that chair this morning. For the first time since Saturday, something loosened slightly in my chest. Not relief, not yet, but the particular steadiness that comes from knowing you are not standing alone. Good, I said. And Lorraine, tell no one outside this office, not yet. She nodded. Then she slid one more page across the desk, a single sheet, handwritten note clipped to the access log. One more thing. The last file Callum downloaded before he closed the session. She tapped the entry. The industrial land parcel on Highway 101. He pulled the full file. Assessment history title chain current negotiation status. I looked at that line on the log. The parcel I had been quietly negotiating with a distribution consortium for the better part of a year. The deal worth $40 million that nobody outside my inner circle was supposed to know existed. Why would he want that file? Lorraine asked. I didn't answer her, but my stomach already knew. I was not in San Francisco the Friday evening Callum and Brecken came home from their honeymoon. I was in Monterey sitting at the kitchen table with a ham sandwich I had made myself and a glass of water I had barely touched, and I was thinking about the fact that I had paid for a 10-day trip to the Maldives for two people who had just tried to rob me blind. The table I was sitting at was the same one Margaret and I bought in 1987 at an estate sale in Carmel. Solid oak, 6 chairs, a water stain on one corner from the winter of 2003 when the roof leaked and we didn't notice until the damage was done. Margaret had wanted to replace it a dozen times over the years. I always talked her out of it. I liked a table that had survived things. I ate half my sandwich, put the other half in the refrigerator, stood at the window and watched the light go flat over the water as the sun dropped behind the hills. At 7:23, Thaddeus called. "They're home," he said without preamble. "The building manager at Pacific Heights delivered the notice in person, as you requested, 45 minutes ago." I pulled out a chair and sat back down. "Tell me." Callum read it twice, then tried to call the Hale Property Group main line. It was closed. He called my office. I let it go to voicemail. Then he called your cell. "I know," I said. I had watched my phone light up with Callum's name 3 times and put it face down on the counter each time. What did the notice say exactly? Exactly what we drafted. That occupancy rights for Unit 38A at Pacific Heights residences are granted under a temporary license agreement between Pacific Heights Holdings LLC and the Hale Family Trust, that the license expires July 27th and that it will not be renewed. Thaddeus paused. For context, Pacific Heights Holdings is one of our subsidiary companies. Callum never asked who actually owned the building. In 3 years of living there, he never looked at the deed. My chest ached. Not from surprise. From the particular exhaustion of being right about something you desperately wished you were wrong about. "He thought he owned it," I said. "He told people he owned it," Thaddeus replied. "I've heard him describe it at dinner parties as our place in the city. Brecken posted about it on social media as home. Neither of them ever saw the underlying paperwork, because neither of them ever asked to." I rubbed my eyes with the heel of my hand. Outside, the last light was disappearing off the water, and the bay was going dark and cold. "How did Brecken react?" I asked. "That's the interesting part." Thaddeus's voice shifted slightly, the careful tone he used when he was presenting something that didn't fit the expected pattern. "Callum was the one making calls according to the building manager. Callum was the one asking questions, raising his voice in the lobby. Brecken, by the manager's account, walked back into the apartment, sat down on the couch, and made 3 phone calls of her own. Quietly. Efficiently. She was done with her calls before Callum finished his first one. That landed somewhere in my chest, like a stone dropping into deep water. "She's not panicking," I said. "No," Thaddeus said. "She is not. A woman who just lost her home panics. A woman who is pivoting to the next plan makes 3 phone calls and lets her husband do the noise." I sat with that for the long moment. Callum was the visible reaction. Brecken was the real one. She had known this was a possibility. She had built the folder precisely because she understood my assets well enough to know they could be moved, which meant she had contingencies, which meant there was a next move I hadn't seen yet. "Thaddeus," I said, "can you find out who she called?" "I'm already working on it." I have a contact at the building who's friendly. It may take a few days. A pause. There's one more thing. Callum sent you a text message at 7:51. Do you want to know what it says? My throat tightened. Every time I thought I had made my peace with what Callum had become, something pulled at the old version of him, the boy who used to fall asleep on car rides home from Little League and have to be carried inside. That boy was still somewhere in the architecture of my memory, and he made everything harder than it should have been. Tell me tomorrow, I said. Of course, Thaddeus said. Raymond, are you all right over there? I'm fine, I said. And then because Thaddeus had known me long enough to hear the difference, I added, I will be. After I hung up, I sat at the oak table for a long time. The house was quiet, in the way old houses get quiet at night, not empty, but settled, full of the weight of years. Margaret's reading glasses were still on the shelf by the back door, where she used to leave them when she came in from the garden. I had never moved them. Every time I thought about moving them, I found a reason not to. I thought about what Thaddeus had said. Brecken made 3 calls and let Callum do the noise. A woman with no options collapses. A woman with a backup plan gets busy. Whatever she was planning next, it was already in motion. I could feel it the way you feel a weather change before it arrives. Not a sound, not a sight, just a pressure shift in the air that your bones recognize before your brain does. I washed my glass, dried it, put it back in the cabinet. Then I went to bed. I did not sleep well. There are moments in a man's life when the truth doesn't arrive as a revelation. It arrives as a tow truck. I drove up to San Jose that Tuesday morning on 3 hours of sleep and a thermos of coffee I had made before 5. The drive up Highway 1 was the kind of drive that clears your head whether you want it cleared or not. Coastal fog, empty lanes, the Pacific doing its indifferent thing off to the left. By the time I pulled into the Hale Property Group parking structure, the fog had burned off, and the sun was coming in hard and flat. Lorraine was already at her desk when I walked in at 8:15. She had the kind of energy that morning that told me she had been there since 7. Before you sit down, she said, I want to tell you that both vehicles were recovered this morning without incident. I say without incident because I want to give you a moment to prepare for what without incident actually means in this context. I sat down. Tell me. The Porsche Taycan was recovered from the Pacific Heights parking structure at 9 o'clock. The fleet management company sent 2 people. The building's front desk attendant was there. 2 residents were coming through the lobby. She paused. Callum was in the lobby when it happened. He'd come down to get the car. I closed my eyes for exactly 1 second. Then I opened them. Keep going. He argued with the recovery team for about 10 minutes. Said there was a mistake. Said his father owned the account, and his father would authorize everything. Lorraine's voice stayed professional, but something careful moved through it. The team showed him the suspension notice from Hale Fleet Management. He read it. He read it again. Then he walked back to the elevator without saying anything else. I thought about Callum at 36 years old, standing in the lobby of the building he thought he owned, watching the car he thought was his get driven away by strangers, and I felt a pain so specific and so deep that I had to breathe through it for a moment before I could speak. And Brecken's vehicle? I asked. The Range Rover was recovered from the street outside her showroom in Hayes Valley at 9:45. 2 clients were waiting for their consultation appointment when the tow truck arrived. Lorraine set her pen down carefully. She came outside, looked at the truck, looked at her clients, and said, and I'm quoting from what her receptionist told our fleet manager, I'll have this sorted by the end of the day. Let's go inside. She did not raise her voice. She did not make a scene. There it was again. The same thing Thaddeus had described on Friday night. Brecken pivoting, Brecken adapting. When the penthouse notice arrived, she made 3 phone calls. When the car disappeared in front of clients, she redirected them inside and started damage control before the tow truck had finished the paperwork. "She's good," I said. Lorraine looked at me. "She's better than good. She's dangerous." She pulled a folder from her desk drawer. "Which is why I want to show you something I put together over the weekend." She opened the folder and slid a 2-page document across the desk. It was a comprehensive list, typed organized by category with dollar values and account references in a column on the right. "Every asset Callum and Brecken are currently using that belongs to Hale Property Group or one of its subsidiaries," Lorraine said. "The penthouse notice already delivered. The 2 vehicles recovered this morning. The corporate credit card Callum has been using for business expenses, suspended Friday at your instruction. The Hale Property Group email address Callum has been presenting on business cards, which he was not authorized to use after leaving the company in 2021, I've requested it be deactivated." She tapped the page. "There are 11 items on this list. Raymond, he has been living inside a life that was never actually his, and he never once questioned where any of it came from." My throat felt raw. I looked at the list. 11 items. 11 things that Callum had been carrying around like they were his own 11 things, that had Margaret's name somewhere in their origin story, because everything we had built came from the 2 of us together, before she got sick and left me to hold the rest of it alone. "What does he have that's actually his?" I asked. Lorraine thought about it for a moment. "The clothes on his back, his personal laptop, a savings account with about $14,000 in it." She hesitated. "And a startup company that on paper has fabricated revenue and real debt. $14,000. My son, who drove a $120,000 car and lived in a $2 million penthouse and told investors about his thriving tech venture, had $14,000 that was actually genuinely his." I picked up the 2-page list. My eyes moved down the columns. At the bottom of page 2, almost as a footnote, was a line I hadn't seen in the version Lorraine had shown me on Monday. "This last line," I said. "Industrial Land Parcel Highway 101 Corridor. Callum listed as authorized contact on internal file June 2023. Lorraine leaned forward. "I added that this morning. I was cross-referencing the access log from the March download with our internal contact records, and I found that 2 years ago, Callum's name was added to the property file as an authorized point of contact. Not an owner, not a manager, just a contact name." She frowned. "Raymond, who authorized that addition." I looked at the line. June 2023. The same month I had given Callum the $3 million investment. He had been inside the company's systems touching files he had no business touching for over 2 years. "I didn't," I said. Lorraine's expression sharpened. "Then someone added it without authorization. Or Callum added it himself using his old access code, which we now know was never properly deactivated." I set the list down on the desk. My mind was moving quickly, connecting things, building a picture I didn't entirely like the shape of yet. "Lorraine," I said, "I need you to pull the full access history for that parcel file. Every time it was opened, every time it was downloaded, every name attached to those actions. Go back 2 years. I'll have it by tomorrow morning." I nodded. Picked up my thermos. The coffee had gone cold somewhere between the Highway 1 fog and the tow truck story, but I drank it anyway. "One more thing," Lorraine said just as I was standing to leave. "I got a call this morning from Marcus Webb. He's a commercial real estate broker who handles industrial properties in the Bay Area corridor. We've worked with him before on a few deals. He said someone reached out to him last week about a potential quick sale on a Highway 101 industrial parcel." She watched my face carefully. "He said the caller identified himself as a representative of Hale Property Group." The cold coffee turned to stone in my stomach. Webb's a careful man, Lorraine added. He didn't agree to anything. He said he wanted to check with us directly before proceeding. She paused. Raymond, whoever called him, didn't sound like one of our people. My son has always been a decent actor. He gets that from Margaret's side of the family. Her brother could cry at a Hallmark commercial with genuine conviction. And her mother once talked her way out of a speeding ticket by describing her fictional dying cat with such specificity that the officer apologized to her. Callum inherited that particular gift. He could make his eyes go soft on command, could drop his shoulders into exactly the right angle of remorse, could load a single word with enough weight to make you feel like you were the unreasonable one for not forgiving him immediately. I had watched him do it his whole life. I had fallen for it his whole life. When I heard his truck pull into my driveway that Thursday afternoon unannounced, no text, no call, I knew which scene was coming. I just didn't know yet how far he was prepared to take it. I was under the kitchen sink when he let himself in. Still had his key to the front door, which I had not changed, partly because changing a lock felt like a declaration I wasn't ready to make out loud, and partly because some stubborn corner of me still believed that a man who has his father's house key might, on some level, still remember what that means. "Dad." His voice came from the entryway. Careful, tentative. The voice of a man testing the temperature of a room before he walks into it. "In here," I called from under the sink. I kept working. The washer needed replacing, and I was going to finish replacing it. Callum appeared in the kitchen doorway. Navy polo shirt, the kind that costs more than it looks like it does. His hair was shorter than the last time I had seen him, shorter than the wedding even. He looked like he hadn't slept well, which was the most honest thing about him that afternoon. "Can I sit down?" he asked. "It's a kitchen," I said. "The chairs are right there." He sat at the table. I heard the chair scrape, heard him set something down, his keys, maybe, or his phone. I stayed under the sink and finished tightening the coupling nut before I slid out and wiped my hands on a shop rag. When I stood up and looked at him directly, something in my chest tightened like a fist closing. He looked young. He always looked young to me when he wasn't performing. And in that first unguarded second, I saw the kid who used to fall asleep in the back of my truck on the way home from ball games, and the pain of that was sharp enough to take my breath away for a moment. Then I noticed the slight rectangular outline in his left breast pocket, a phone lying horizontal, screen facing outward through thin fabric. "You drove all the way down from the city," I said, settling into the chair across from him. "I needed to talk to you." He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and his eyes were doing the thing, the soft, wounded thing, that had worked on me so many times before. "Dad, I've been trying to figure out how to say this for weeks. What happened at the wedding, Brecken, was in a bad place. She'd been under enormous pressure with the business, with the financing, with everything. She made a choice that I should have stopped her from making, and I didn't. And I'm sorry for that. I'm genuinely sorry." His voice cracked on the last word. Just slightly. Just enough. I looked at him. I looked at the pocket. I looked at him again. "Callum," I said, keeping my voice even. "Take the phone out of your pocket and put it on the table." He went very still. The performance didn't collapse so much as it suspended, like an actor who has just heard something go wrong off stage and isn't sure yet whether to keep going. "Dad, the pocket," I said. "Take it out." He reached into his breast pocket and set the phone on the table between us. The screen was facing up. The recording app was running. 4 minutes and 11 seconds. He had the grace at least to look ashamed. His jaw worked for a moment, and then he looked down at the table, and when he looked up again, the softness was gone and something raw had taken its place. "Who suggested it?" I asked. You or Brecken. It doesn't matter who, it matters to me. He pressed his lips together. His hands were flat on the table now, and I could see the tendons standing out across his knuckles. She thought if you said something if you lost your temper, or said something that showed you weren't thinking clearly, it would help with the filing. The competency filing, I said. He flinched. Raymond. Don't call me Raymond. My voice came out harder than I intended, and I saw him pull back slightly. I took a breath. Callum, you came into my house with a running recorder in your pocket and a rehearsed speech designed to provoke me into saying something you could use in a legal proceeding. I want you to hear yourself say that out loud. His throat moved. I know how it sounds. I know how. I don't think you do, I said. Because if you did, you wouldn't be sitting there looking surprised that I found it. I stood up and walked to the counter needing something to do with my hands. I picked up the shop rag and put it down again. And I want you to know something else. California is a two-party consent state. That recording, whether you use it or delete it, is a violation of Penal Code Section 632. You recorded me without my knowledge in my own home. That's not just bad judgment, son. That's a crime. The color drained from his face so fast it was almost remarkable. I didn't know, he started. Yes, you did, I said. Or Brecken did, which is the same thing at this point. I turned and looked at him. My chest hurt. My eyes stung. I loved this person with a depth that made all of this unbearable, and I had to hold both of those things at the same time, the love and the clarity about what he had become. What do you want, Callum? Not the script. What do you actually want? For a moment, something real moved across his face, something unguarded and frightened and very young. I want to not be in this situation, he said. I want none of this to have happened. So do I said. More than you know. He picked up his phone, stopped the recording, set it back down. Then he stood up, and when he looked at me from across the kitchen, he looked like a man who had come to a door expecting it to open and found that the lock had been changed after all. This isn't over, Dad, he said. There are options we haven't explored yet. Whose options? I asked. Yours or hers? He didn't answer. He walked to the front door, and I heard it close behind him with a click that felt very final. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after that, staring at the sink I had just fixed. The house settled around me. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, his truck started up and pulled out of the driveway. Options. He had said it like a word he'd been handed. Thaddeus Mercer never calls before 8 in the morning. In 27 years, through real estate crashes and lawsuits and the kind of business emergencies that would make a lesser man's hair go white overnight, he has maintained a discipline about morning hours that I have always respected and occasionally envied. His first call of the day comes at 8, not a minute before, because he believes that no problem worth solving requires waking a man before he has had his coffee. When my phone rang at 6:14 on a Wednesday morning in late July, I knew before I answered it that the news was serious. I was in the backyard replacing the lower boards on the fence line that runs along the north edge of the property. Post and rail cedar, the kind that weathers beautifully if you maintain it and crumbles if you don't. I had been out there since 5:30 working in the cool of the morning before the heat came in off the hills. There is something clarifying about physical work, the kind where your hands know exactly what to do and your mind is free to turn things over quietly. I had been turning a lot of things over in the 3 weeks since Callum walked out of my kitchen. I set down my hammer and picked up the phone. Thaddeus, you're calling early. Raymond. His voice had a particular quality I had only heard a few times over the years. Not panic, because Thaddeus did not panic, but a controlled urgency, the voice of a man who has just seen something coming fast and is calculating the exact right moment to move. I need you to listen carefully. A contact of mine in the California State Bar Network flagged something this morning. A physician named Warren Pell has filed for reinstatement of his medical evaluation license. I picked up my hammer again because I needed something in my hands. Who is Warren Pell? He was a licensed forensic medical evaluator, the kind who performs competency assessments for legal proceedings. He was suspended in 2019 for signing cognitive evaluation certificates for patients he had never examined. Essentially, he was selling his signature to attorneys who needed medical documentation for guardianship and conservatorship cases. Thaddeus paused. He lost his license. He has been operating in a gray area since then, doing informal consulting. And last week, he filed to be reinstated. I drove a nail into a fence board. Why is that relevant to me? Because simultaneously, with his reinstatement, filing a competency evaluation petition was submitted to the San Francisco Superior Court. The subject of the petition is described as a 69-year-old male residing in Monterey County, California, with 2 commercial real estate holdings, a family trust, and a history of, and I am reading directly, increasing forgetfulness, paranoid ideation, and susceptibility to manipulation by legal and financial advisors. The hammer stopped moving. My legal and financial advisor was Thaddeus. My financial officer was Lorraine. The petition was describing them as the manipulators. It was describing me as the victim of the people trying to protect me. I stood in my backyard in the early morning light, with my heart hammering against my ribs and the taste of something metallic at the back of my throat. And I breathed through it. In. Out. Like I had learned to do when Margaret was diagnosed. Like I had learned to do every time the ground shifted. They're going for conservatorship, I said. That's the architecture of it, yes. Under California's probate code conservatorship provisions, a court can appoint a conservator to manage the finances of someone deemed unable to manage their own affairs. If the court grants even a temporary evaluation order, they gain access to your medical records, your financial correspondence, and your decision-making history, including the decision to freeze Callum's accounts. Thaddeus's voice was steady, but I could hear the effort behind it. Raymond, if Pell signs an evaluation declaring cognitive decline, and if a judge rubber stamps it before we can mount a challenge, Brecken could petition for conservatorship within weeks. She would control your accounts, your company votes, everything. I sat down on the low garden wall. The morning was beautiful in the way that California mornings often are clear sky, mockingbird going at it in the neighbor's oak tree smell of cedar from the fresh-cut boards. The beauty of it felt almost offensive. She'd control Hale Property Group, I said. She would vote your shares. She could restructure. She could remove Lorraine. She could approve transactions. He let that settle. And Raymond, if the petition names Callum as the proposed conservator, then your son would be your legal guardian. He would decide what you can spend, what you can sign, where you live. My son would decide where I lived. I pressed the heel of my free hand against my sternum, where the pressure was building into something I refused to call fear. It wasn't fear. It was fury, the cold, structural kind that builds in a man when he understands that someone intends to dismantle him piece by piece and call it care. How long before the formal filing? I asked. 2 weeks. Possibly 3, depending on how quickly Pell's reinstatement moves. Thaddeus cleared his throat. Raymond, there's one more thing. My contact ran a financial trace on Pell's recent activity. Last Tuesday, a wire transfer of $15,000 arrived in his personal account from a shell company registered in Nevada. The transfer went through 6 days before any evaluation was scheduled, before he had been assigned a subject, before he had seen a single file. He paused to let that land. She paid him before he saw me, I said. She paid him to reach a conclusion before he had a patient. That's what the timing suggests, Thaddeus said, which moves this from civil fraud into potential criminal territory. A physician who accepts payment to predetermine a medical evaluation is committing fraud on the court. I stood back up, picked up my hammer, looked at the fence line I still needed to finish. I want 2 things done today, I said. First, document that wire transfer completely. The shell company, the Nevada registration, the timing relative to the filing. Everything. Second, call Stanford Medical Center and UCSF. I want independent neurological and cognitive evaluations scheduled at both. Different facilities, different departments, no connection between them. I want to be evaluated by people who have never heard my name before and have no financial relationship with anyone in my family. I'll make the calls this morning, Thaddeus said. Raymond, are you all right? I looked at the cedar fence boards, at the hammer in my hand, at the work I had been doing since before sunrise, building something with my own hands the way I had always built things. I've been preparing for bad news my whole career, I said. The only difference between bad news in business and bad news from your own son is that in business, it's never personal. Thaddeus was quiet for a beat. And this is personal, I said. But I've got work to finish. I'll talk to you this afternoon. I hung up the phone and drove another nail into the fence. We are exactly halfway through this story, and the second half is where everything I had quietly prepared begins to matter. Before we go there, tell me something in the comments, type Raymond, if you think I made the right call waiting this long. Type too long if you think I should have acted sooner. I want to know what you would have done. This story includes fictional elements added for depth and educational value. Names, locations, and some circumstances have been shaped for storytelling, but the heart of what I'm telling you is something real families carry. If that's not what you're here for, no judgment. But if you're staying, the best part is still ahead. I have spent my life making decisions that involved hundreds of millions of dollars, and I have never once been asked to count backward from 100 by sevens, while a stranger in a white coat watched my face for signs of confusion. It is a humbling experience. I sat in the neuropsychology department at Stanford Medical Center on a Wednesday morning in early August, in a room that smelled of recycled air and hand sanitizer, and I counted. 100, 93, 86, 79. The evaluating physician, a woman in her early 40s with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the unhurried precision of someone who had done this 10,000 times, made notes on her tablet without looking up. Good, she said. Now I'm going to read you a list of words. I'll ask you to recall them in 15 minutes. I nodded. She read the list. I held the words in my head the way I had always held things I needed to remember, not by force but by association, building a small architecture around each one so it had somewhere to live. The evaluation took 4 hours. Memory tests, logic sequences, spatial reasoning, and MRI that took 40 minutes and left my ears ringing faintly afterward. A 90-minute interview with a clinical psychologist who asked about my daily routine, my decision-making process, my relationship history, my financial activities. He asked whether I ever felt confused about where I was, whether I forgot appointments, whether I had ever made a financial decision and later been unable to explain my reasoning. I made a decision last month to freeze approximately $4 million in financial guarantees extended to my son and daughter-in-law. I told him. I can explain every element of that reasoning in as much detail as you'd like. He looked at me over the top of his notepad. Please do. So I did. I walked him through the folder, the power of attorney clauses, the fabricated startup revenue, the guarantee misappropriation, Pell's wire transfer. I spoke for 22 minutes without notes. When I finished, the psychologist set his pen down and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite categorize. "Mr. Hale," he said, "I'm going to be direct with you. This evaluation was requested for purposes of legal documentation, and I understand the context. But I want you to know that in 20 years of practice, I have rarely seen a subject present their own situation with this level of precision and emotional regulation simultaneously." He paused. "The combination is unusual. Most people are either precise or regulated. You appear to be both." Something loosened in my chest that had been tight for weeks. Not vanity, I wasn't proud of being sharp, I was simply relieved that no one could take it from me on paper. "Thank you," I said. "What happens next?" "I'll have the written evaluation ready within 48 hours. Based on what I've seen today, my clinical conclusion will be unambiguous." He closed his notepad. "You are not a man in cognitive decline, Mr. Hale. You are a man under extraordinary stress who is handling it with remarkable clarity." I drove home from Palo Alto with the windows down and the radio off, and for the first time since the wedding, I felt something that was not quite peace but was close to it, the particular steadiness of a man who has just confirmed that the ground beneath him is solid. 2 days later, on Friday morning, I was at UCSF in San Francisco for the second evaluation. Different hospital, different department, different physicians, none of whom had any contact with the Stanford team. The chief of neurology there was a tall man in his mid-60s who reminded me slightly of Thaddeus, the same quality of deliberate patience, the same sense of someone who had learned long ago not to be surprised by human behavior. He reviewed the results of the morning's testing in the afternoon and looked across his desk at me with something that might have been admiration. "Mr. Hale," he said, "your processing speed scores are in the 94th percentile for your age group. Your episodic memory is exceptional. Your executive function planning, reasoning, inhibition control is superior to many men I evaluate who are 20 years younger than you." He leaned back in his chair. "I want to ask you something off the record. Are you preparing for a legal challenge?" "I am," I said. He nodded slowly. "Then whoever is challenging your competency is going to have a very difficult morning in court." I smiled. It was the first real smile I had produced in a long time, and I felt it all the way up from somewhere deep in my chest, warm and genuine, and slightly watery around the edges. I pressed my fingers against the corner of one eye and breathed through it. "I appreciate that," I said. By 5 o'clock that afternoon, I was back in my truck in the UCSF parking structure. 2 notarized affidavits in my briefcase. One from Stanford, one from UCSF, each signed by no fewer than 2 independent physicians, each stating in clear, unambiguous legal language that Raymond Hale was of sound mind, full cognitive capacity, and entirely capable of managing his own financial and personal affairs. Thaddeus called at 5:17. "Raymond, the evaluations, how did they go?" "About as well as they could have gone," I said, and I heard him exhale with a relief he rarely allowed himself to express out loud. "I have 2 notarized affidavits. 94th percentile Thaddeus. They're going to look very foolish in front of a judge." "Good," he said, and I could hear him smiling. "There's something else. I got a call today from Desmond Grant." I straightened in the driver's seat. "The venue manager. He called my office directly. He said he has something he's been holding since the wedding day. He wouldn't tell me what on the phone. He said he wanted to meet in person." Thaddeus paused. "He asked specifically for you, Raymond, not me. And he said something that I want you to hear exactly as he said it." Another pause. "He said, 'Tell Mr. Hale that someone already offered me $10,000 to say I don't have it. The parking structure was cool and gray around me. I sat very still. Someone already tried to buy it, I said. And Desmond didn't sell, Thaddeus said. Whatever he's holding, he's held onto it through a $10,000 offer. That tells you something about the man. It tells me everything, I said. Set up the meeting for Monday morning. Somewhere neutral, not the office, not my house. Somewhere public and quiet. I thought for a moment. And Thaddeus? Use your personal cell for everything from here on, not the office line. Desmond Grant was not a complicated man, and I mean that as the highest form of compliment. He drove the same Chevy Silverado he had bought in 2009. He managed events at Rosewood Estate with the quiet competence of someone who understood that the best work is the kind nobody notices. And he believed in the uncomplicated way that some people simply believe things that a man who does right by you deserves to have right done by him in return. 23 years ago, I co-signed a small business loan for him when the bank said no. He had been trying to get his first event management company off the ground, and the numbers weren't there yet, and I happened to know his character was. He paid the loan back in full 2 years early, and he had never once mentioned it to me since, not as a debt, not as a favor, not as a reason I owed him anything. He had just quietly done good work and moved forward. That Monday morning, he was already at the corner table of Dune's Coffee when I arrived, nursing a black coffee and wearing the same kind of flannel shirt I tended to wear myself. He stood up when I came in, and we shook hands, the way men shake hands when they are glad to see each other, but the circumstances don't call for anything warmer. Mr. Hale, he said, thank you for meeting me in person. Raymond, I said, sit down, and thank you for calling. He sat. He reached into the chest pocket of his shirt and set a small USB drive on the table between us. He didn't say anything about it yet. He looked at me with the direct, undecorated gaze of a man who has been carrying something heavy and is about to put it down. Before I tell you what's on that, he said, I want you to know I didn't listen to it for the first 2 weeks. I found it on the system log the Monday after the wedding, and I left it alone. I told myself it wasn't my business what happened between your family. What changed your mind? I asked. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. A woman came to the venue on July 3rd. White Mercedes' expensive suit introduced herself as representing the Cole family. She said she needed to review our security footage from the June 14th event. He paused. When I told her our system also runs audio through the entrance microphone in the main corridor, the one that picks up the hallway outside the VIP rooms, she stopped smiling. Then she offered me $10,000 in cash to certify that the system had malfunctioned that day. My jaw tightened. $10,000. Cash. Brecken had moved fast. What did you tell her? I asked. I told her I'd think about it. Desmond's voice was matter-of-fact, but his eyes were steady and clear. She left a number. He slid a small, folded piece of paper across the table. I called your attorney that same afternoon. Mr. Mercer told me to say nothing to her, to wait, and if she called back, to record it. She called back, I said. Twice. He reached into his other pocket and set an older model flip phone on the table beside the USB drive. The first call, she just asked if I'd made a decision. I told her I needed more time. The second call, he tapped the flip phone. She came up to 25,000. I recorded that one start to finish on Mr. Mercer's instruction using my personal device. California law allows a party to a conversation to record it without informing the other party so long as they're participating in the call themselves. He said it plainly, like a man who had done his homework and wanted me to know it was clean. I looked at the USB drive. At the flip phone. At this man sitting across from me in a flannel shirt who had been offered $25,000 and had instead called my attorney and done everything right. "Desmond," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. "Why didn't you take it?" "25,000 is real money." He looked at me straight. "Because you co-signed my loan in 2002 when the bank said no. You didn't ask me why I needed it. You didn't make me explain myself. You just looked at me and said you believed I'd make it work." He shrugged one shoulder. 25,000 doesn't buy that. I had to press my hand flat against the table for a moment. My throat had tightened to something almost painful, and I was not going to make a spectacle of myself in a coffee shop. But it was close. It was very close. "Can I hear it?" I asked, nodding at the USB drive. He produced a small speaker from his jacket pocket, the kind you can pair with anything, and handed me one earbud. He plugged in the drive, navigated to the file, and pressed play. The audio was imperfect corridor acoustics, some ambient noise from outside, but it was clear enough. I heard the door to the VIP waiting room open. I heard Brecken's heels on the tile. I heard her voice, smooth and controlled, laying out the ultimatum. I heard Callum's voice, the particular flatness of a man who has rehearsed his lines. And I heard my own voice, quieter than I remembered it sounding, from the inside, asking one question. "Have the two of you thought this through?" I took the earbud out, set it on the table. "How many copies?" I asked. "3, Desmond said. "One with my personal attorney in Salinas, one in a safety deposit box in Carmel, and that one." He nodded at the USB. "That one is yours." I picked it up and held it for a moment. Something that small, something that fit in my shirt pocket. It contained the proof that what happened in that room was not a family disagreement, or a misunderstanding, or a confused old man creating conflict. It was a planned, deliberate, witnessed ultimatum. And Desmond Grant had held on to it through 2 cash offers because 23 years ago I had believed in him. "I'll need you to be available as a witness," I said. "Potentially in a legal proceeding. It could be uncomfortable." "I know," he said. "I'm not worried about uncomfortable." I nodded, pocketed the USB, stood and extended my hand, and when we shook this time there was something warmer in it than when I had arrived. I drove back toward Monterey with the windows down, and the morning coastal air coming in sharp and clean. Thaddeus called before I had cleared the Carmel city limits. "How did it go?" he asked. "Well," I said, "Thaddeus, I need you to run a trace on the phone number Desmond gave me. The woman who came to the venue. Find out who she is and who she works for." "Already queued up," he said. "Raymond, there's something I want you to think about." Brecken knew that Micro existed. She sent someone to buy it within 3 weeks of the wedding, which means someone inside Rosewood Estate told her it was there. I had been thinking about exactly that for the last 40 minutes. "Someone on Desmond's staff," I said, "or someone who had access to the venue's security specifications," Thaddeus said, "which would require knowing to ask for them." Raymond, who would have known to ask. Lorraine Bennett had been sending me progress reports every evening at 7 o'clock for 19 years. Rain or shine, quarter end or slow season, she sent a short summary of where things stood and what needed attention in the morning. It was one of the most reliable rhythms in my professional life, more reliable in some ways than anything else I could name. On the evening of August 20th, her report was 2 sentences long. Found something significant. "Can you come in tomorrow morning?" Lorraine had never in 19 years sent me a 2-sentence report. I read it 3 times, then set my phone down on the kitchen table and sat with the oak and the quiet for a long while before I went to bed. I was at her office by 7:45 the next morning. She was already there, laptop open, a legal pad covered in notes beside it, and a cup of coffee at her elbow that she clearly hadn't touched since it was hot. She looked like a woman who had been up since 5 deciding how to say something. "Sit down," she said. "I found this in the backup archive from Callum's old company email account, the one he used during his 18 months on staff here. When he left in 2021, the account was supposed to be deactivated. As we already know, it wasn't." She turned the laptop to face me. 3 days ago, while I was cross-referencing the March access log, I found that Callum had used that account to forward personal correspondence to himself on at least 12 occasions. The system logged and retained the forwarded content as company records. I leaned forward to look at the screen. "What kind of correspondence?" "Mostly logistical things. Calendar items, contacts, a few financial documents." She paused. "And one email chain that I don't think was meant to end up in a company archive." She scrolled to the relevant thread and turned the laptop fully toward me. "This was forwarded from Callum's personal Gmail to his company account on November 4th of last year, 7 months before the wedding." I looked at the screen. The original sender was an address I didn't recognize, a personal Gmail account with initials in the name. The recipient was Brecken's personal address. The subject line was blank. "Who is the original sender?" I asked. "Based on the email pattern and cross-referencing with Brecken's social media, my best assessment is that it's her mother," Lorraine said carefully. "I can't confirm that without a subpoena, but the content is consistent with the parent-child exchange." "Read it to me," I said. "The relevant parts." Lorraine pulled the laptop back slightly, adjusted her reading glasses, and began. "The timeline is moving faster than I expected." She read, her voice steady and professional, even as the words landed in the room like stones dropping into still water. "C is more attached to his father's approval than I thought, which makes him easier to manage but harder to redirect. Once the property is transferred, the next step is the post-nuptial. His name will be on the deed, that's what he wants. What he won't read carefully is the clause giving me sole disposition rights in the event of separation. I've already had it drafted." My hands, which had been resting flat on the desk, curled slowly into fists. "Keep going," I said. "The old man is the real obstacle. He's quiet, but he watches everything. I need C to keep him distracted and feeling guilty about the business investment. As long as C thinks he's protecting me from his father's judgment, he'll keep performing." Lorraine paused, looked up at me briefly, then continued. "Give me 18 months after the wedding. Enough time for the property transfer to be legally clean. Then we reassess." The room felt very still. Not quiet, the building was never quiet. There was always the hum of climate control and the distant sound of the elevator. But still, the way things go, still, when something significant has just shifted. "There are 3 more emails in the chain," Lorraine said. She did not immediately continue. She was watching me with the careful attention of someone who understands they are delivering news that will hurt and wants to make sure the person receiving it is still standing. "The last one," I said. "What does it say?" She scrolled to the bottom of the thread. "Dated January 15th of this year, 5 months before the wedding." She read slowly. "If the direct transfer doesn't work, there's a secondary option. C has been suggesting it himself, the competency angle. I didn't plant that idea. He did." I heard the words. I let them settle. Callum had suggested the competency evaluation strategy, not Brecken. My son had looked at his father and thought, if I can make people believe he's losing his mind, I can take everything he built. And he had offered that idea to his future wife as a tool. I reached over and closed the laptop. Gently. The way you close a door you don't want to slam. "Raymond," Lorraine's voice had dropped to something careful. "Does this change anything for you about Callum I thought about that honestly. My chest ached with a pain that had no clean name. It wasn't grief exactly, and it wasn't rage exactly. It was the specific agony of a parent who has loved a child without reservation and is now holding documented proof of who that child chose to become. It explains things, I said. It doesn't excuse things. I looked at her. Callum signed that document. Callum pointed a recording device at me in my own kitchen. He made choices, Lorraine. Understanding where some of those choices came from doesn't unmake them. She nodded. What do you need from me? I need the email chain preserved and authenticated. Chain of custody documented from the moment you found it. And I need you to prepare a summary memo, not a full report, just the essential facts that Thaddeus can attach to the legal file. I stood up. How long will that take? End of day today, she said. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. My movements felt deliberate, controlled the way they do when I am working hard to keep something held together on the inside. I paused at the door. Lorraine, I said, you've been with this company for 19 years. You found this. You documented it. You could have decided none of this was your concern. She looked at me evenly. It is my concern. This company is my concern. You are my concern. A beat. And besides, I like my job. I'd prefer to still have it. That pulled something almost like a laugh out of me, not quite, but close enough to feel like a relief valve releasing. I nodded, stepped into the hallway, and walked to the elevator. The drive back to Monterey was 2 hours on the 101, and I did not turn the radio on once. I thought about the email. I thought about the phrase, C has been suggesting it himself. I thought about Callum in my kitchen with a recording phone in his pocket. And I thought about how if Brecken's account was accurate, that plan had originated with my son. I turned that over for 90 miles, and I did not like the shape it made no matter how I arranged it. My phone lit up on the passenger seat at 11:17 that night. A text from Lorraine. One line, Raymond, I need to show you something about the Highway 101 parcel first thing Monday. Callum has been in contact with a broker. It's not what I expected. There is a question I have been avoiding since I began telling you this story. Not because I don't know the answer. I have known the answer since the morning in March when Lorraine first walked into my office with a single sheet of paper. I have been avoiding it because answering it honestly requires me to admit something about myself, that I saw what was coming, and I chose to let it arrive. And I have spent every day since the wedding living with the weight of that choice. So let me tell you now. Let me tell you about the man I actually am, not just the man this story makes me look like. It was a Friday night in late August, and I was sitting at the desk in my home study. The room was dim, just the reading lamp in the corner, and the blue glow of the laptop I had not yet opened. On the desk in front of me was my personal journal. I have kept one since Margaret got sick, because she told me once that writing things down was the only way to hold them still long enough to understand them. And she was right about most things. I opened it to March 14th. My handwriting looked back at me, the slightly cramped script of a left-handed man who learned to write in an era when teachers tried to correct you out of it. March 14th. Lorraine brought the access log this morning. Callum used his old employee code to download the full asset inventory. He has the deed records, the trust filings, the parcel assessments. He has everything he needs to hand someone a roadmap. I could confront him. I should confront him. I am not going to confront him, not yet. I had known on March 14th, 11 weeks before the wedding. 3 months before Brecken set a manila folder on a table in front of me and told me to sign. I had known and I had waited, and in the waiting I had let my son walk all the way to the edge of the cliff, so that when he finally stepped off, there would be no pretending he had tripped. My eyes were burning. I pressed my fingers against them for a moment, hard enough to see stars. The truth about why I waited is this: I had intervened before. When Callum was 28, he had used the family name to approach investors without asking me, and I had called him and corrected it, and he had apologized and done it again 3 years later with more sophistication. When his startup numbers didn't add up in 2022, I had asked questions, and he had redirected me, and I had accepted the redirection because I wanted to believe the version of him that was trying. Every time I stepped in early, Callum learned how to be more careful. He learned how to hide better. He learned that his father would catch him, and his father would correct him, and there would be consequences that were uncomfortable but survivable. He never learned what it felt like to reach the actual bottom of the hole he was digging. Margaret had told me that. Not about Callum specifically, she had been gone 6 years before I fully understood what she meant, but about parenting in general. You protect him so well, Raymond, that he never learns what he's being protected from. I had remembered that in March. I had remembered it, and I had put Lorraine's access log in my desk drawer, and I had called Thaddeus and told him to begin monitoring Callum's financial activity without alerting anyone. And I had waited. The waiting had been the hardest thing I had ever done. Harder than the early years of building the company. Harder than the 2008 crash. Harder than sitting with Margaret in that hospital room in Palo Alto and holding her hand while the doctor explained what was happening to her. Because at least in all of those situations, I was doing something. In March, in April, in May, I was deliberately doing nothing, and it required a discipline I did not know I possessed. I stood up from the desk and walked to the window. The backyard was dark, just the outline of the cedar fence I had been repairing in increments over the summer. Margaret's rose garden was still there along the south wall. I kept it maintained not because I was good at it, but because letting it go felt like letting go of something I wasn't ready to release. I waited because I loved him, I said aloud. The room didn't answer, but it felt necessary to say it into the air rather than just think it. I let it go to the end because I needed to know the full shape of it. And now I know. I went back to the desk, opened the bottom drawer. Under the most recent Hale Property Group annual report beneath a copy of a zoning variance filing from 2019, there was a manila envelope. Plain unsealed my handwriting on the outside Trust Amendment Draft 1. I had asked Thaddeus to prepare the first draft in April, 2 months before the wedding. While I was still watching and waiting and saying nothing, I had quietly begun rewriting the document that would govern what happened to everything I had built after I was gone. I did not open the envelope tonight. I knew what was in it. Thaddeus and I had gone through 3 revisions since April, and the current version was locked in his safe. But I held the envelope in my hands for a moment. It was lighter than it should have felt, given what it contained. I set it back in the drawer, closed it. The reading lamp made a small warm circle on the desk. Margaret's photograph was on the corner of the bookshelf, the one from our anniversary trip to Napa in 2008. She was laughing at something I had said, and her eyes were bright, and she looked so thoroughly alive that looking at it still caught me off guard sometimes. I think I did the right thing, I told her. I'm not certain. I don't know if a parent ever gets to be certain. I touched the edge of the frame. But I didn't do it because I wanted to punish him. I want you to know that. I did it because I ran out of other ways to love him. My phone lit up on the desk. Lorraine's text from earlier in the evening. The one about the Highway 101 parcel. The one about Callum and a broker. I read it again. It's not what I expected. Lorraine was careful with her words. 19 years of working together had made her precise in the way that accountants and surgeons are precise, nothing wasted, nothing added. When she wrote that something was not what she expected, she meant it was worse. I put the phone face down. I closed the journal. And I went to bed knowing that whatever Monday morning brought, I had been building toward it since the 14th of March, and I was ready. The industrial parcel on the Highway 101 South Corridor had been in the Hale Property Group portfolio since 1998. I paid $800,000 for it at a time when everyone who knew anything about real estate told me it was overpriced scrubland with no future. The soil was poor, the access road was a problem, and the nearest utility connection was 2 miles east. I bought it anyway because I had looked at the zoning maps and the freight corridor projections, and I trusted what I saw more than I trusted what people told me. 27 years later, that parcel was the anchor site of a distribution consortium deal, worth at conservative estimate $40 million. It was also, as of last Friday, apparently for sale. Lorraine was at her desk when I walked in at 8 o'clock Monday morning, and she had the expression of a woman who had spent the weekend carrying something heavy and was relieved to finally be able to put it down in front of someone who could help her decide what to do with it. "Tell me about Webb," I said before I had even sat down. She pulled a printed call summary from the top of her stack. Marcus Webb called Friday afternoon at 4:47. He said a man had contacted him the previous Tuesday, September 2nd, identifying himself as an authorized representative of Hale Property Group and expressing interest in a quick private sale of the Highway 101 industrial parcel. She looked up at me. He asked for a cash transaction below market value completed within 30 days. The back of my neck went cold. What reason did he give for the speed? He said the company was restructuring and needed to liquidate certain non-core assets before the end of the quarter. Lorraine set the summary down. Raymond Webb has been in commercial real estate in this corridor for 22 years. He has worked with us on 4 separate transactions. He knows what our non-core assets look like, and he knows the Highway 101 parcel is not one of them. She paused. He also said the caller's name didn't match anyone on our authorized contact list. When Webb asked for written authorization, the caller said he would send documentation. And did he? Lorraine slid a single sheet across the desk. It was a faxed copy of a power of attorney document. My name at the top as the principal, a signature at the bottom that was meant to be mine. I looked at the signature for a long moment. The letter form was close. Someone had studied my handwriting carefully. But the pressure pattern was wrong, and the way I crossed the capital H in Hale was off by a degree that anyone who had seen my actual signature enough times would recognize. "He faxed a forged power of attorney," I said. "Yes," Lorraine said. Webb recognized the property from the parcel number he'd seen it in our portfolio documentation during the 2021 deal. The moment he looked it up and saw the current assessed value and the consortium negotiation status, he called me directly rather than proceeding. She leaned forward slightly. "Raymond, the 2019 assessment value on file, the one Callum downloaded in March, listed the parcel at $4.2 million. That's what he thought he was selling." I sat back in the chair. My chest felt like something heavy had been placed on it and left there. "He thought he was selling $4 million scrubland," I said. "He had no idea about the consortium." "None. The consortium negotiations are held in a separate file that requires senior management authorization to access. His old employee code didn't reach it." Lorraine's voice was steady, but her eyes were tight at the corners. "He was trying to sell a $40 million asset for a fraction of its value using a forged signature to a broker he thought wouldn't look too closely." I stood up, walked to the window. The San Jose skyline was doing its ordinary Monday morning thing: glass towers, construction, cranes, the distant gray of the bay. I had built parts of that skyline. I had spent 40 years making things that lasted. My son had just tried to sell one of them with a piece of paper he forged in what I could only imagine was a desperate, sleepless weekend. "Call Thaddeus," I said. "Right now while I'm here. I want him on speaker." Lorraine dialed. Thaddeus picked up on the second ring. "Thaddeus, I said Callum attempted to sell the Highway 101 parcel last week using a forged power of attorney. Marcus Webb has the documentation. I need you to tell me what we're lufting at legally. A beat of quiet on the line. Then, forgery of a power of attorney is a felony under California Penal Code Section 470. Attempted fraudulent conveyance of property using that document adds a second count. If the transaction had completed, we would be looking at grand theft. The property value puts it well above the felony threshold. Thaddeus paused. Raymond, do you want to file a criminal complaint? My throat tightened. I looked at the forged signature on the fax, at the H in Hale wrong by one small degree. If I don't file, I said, and he tries this with someone who doesn't know my signature, then someone gets defrauded, Thaddeus said. And you may be liable for not acting when you had knowledge. I pressed my hand against the window glass. It was cool and solid and real. Document everything, I said. Webb's call log the fax, the original access records from March. Build the file. And Thaddeus hold the criminal complaint for now. I want to see the full picture before we move. I took a breath. How does a man get this desperate? Thaddeus answered carefully. A man gets this desperate when every other option has closed, and he still believes there's one door he hasn't tried. Another pause. Raymond Brecken's credit lines are starting to move. Lorraine flagged 3 bank notifications this morning. The freezes are beginning. Lorraine was already nodding on her end, pulling up the notifications on her screen. Send them to me tonight, I said. I ended the call. Stood at the window for another moment. The parcel on Highway 101 had started as scrubland that nobody wanted, and I had built it into something worth $40 million through patience and judgment, and the willingness to see what other people couldn't see yet. Callum had looked at the same asset and seen a quick exit from a hole he had dug himself into. That was the distance between us now. Not years, not personality, not the ordinary friction of fathers and sons. The distance between us was that. I picked up my jacket. Lorraine, I'll need Webb's notarized statement by end of week. Already requested, she said. I walked to the door. Paused. He was working alone on this one, I said. Brecken didn't know he was going to Webb. It wasn't a question. I could feel the truth of it in the shape of the plan, too crude, too rushed, none of the polish that Brecken brought to her schemes. That's my read as well, Lorraine said. They were running in different directions now. 2 people who had plotted together, and now each of them was scrambling on their own. That was not a partnership anymore. That was 2 people who were about to become each other's biggest problem. A business built on borrowed credibility collapses the same way a building built on borrowed ground collapses. Not all at once. Not dramatically. It starts with one crack that seems almost too small to worry about. Then another. Then the whole structure comes down in a week, and afterward you look at the rubble and realize the end was there from the beginning, you just couldn't see it from outside. I watched Brecken Coal Interiors collapse from a distance in real time through the daily reports Lorraine sent me at 7 o'clock each evening, that first week of September. I was in Monterey for all of it, eating simple meals at the oak table, walking the property in the early mornings before the heat came in, doing the ordinary things a man does when he is waiting for something he set in motion to finish its work. The first call came on the morning of September 2nd. First Pacific Bank called at 9:15, Lorraine told me. They flagged the Brecken Coal Interiors primary credit account for review. When they ran the guarantee verification, they discovered the Hale Property Group backing had been suspended. And when they pulled the original guarantee documents, their compliance team found that the stated purpose of the credit line on the application didn't match the actual transactions. She told them the money was for inventory acquisition, but the expenditures show retail lease payments and payroll. She paused. They've frozen the account pending investigation. $320,000 inaccessible. I was standing at the kitchen window when she told me that. The fog was still on the water, the gray-white kind that burns off by 10, but sits heavy in the early hours. I thought about the word inaccessible and what it must have felt like landing in Brecken's morning. How did she respond? I asked. She called the bank's commercial lending department 4 times before noon. The 4th call, she asked to speak to the branch president. He wasn't available. Lorraine's voice was careful the way it always was when she was delivering information about people she had decided not to judge out loud. She's trying to negotiate, but there's nothing to negotiate when the underlying guarantee no longer exists. The 2nd call came on September 3rd. The San Francisco commercial landlord managing Brecken's Hayes Valley showroom had sent a notice of default. The lease contained a financial stability clause standard in high-value commercial leases, requiring the tenant to maintain the credit backing listed in the original application. With the Hale Property Group guarantee withdrawn, she had 5 business days to provide substitute collateral or face termination. She doesn't have substitute collateral, I said. No, Lorraine said. She doesn't have anything that would satisfy that requirement. September 4th brought Wells Commercial calling in the renovation loan. $180,000 secured against the showroom improvements she had made over the past 18 months. The bank exercised its right to demand early repayment under the Material Adverse Change Clause, a provision that allows a lender to accelerate a loan when the borrower's financial circumstances change significantly. Brecken's circumstances had changed as significantly as they possibly could. By September 5th, the Italian furniture supplier she had been working with for 2 years, a company based outside Florence that made the kind of pieces that cost what some people make in a month, had stopped a shipment mid-transit. $95,000 in inventory currently sitting in a bonded warehouse in Oakland, going nowhere until someone produced payment that her accounts could no longer generate. That evening, Lorraine called at 7:15 instead of 7. 2 clients canceled appointments today, she said. A trade publication ran a short notice about the credit review. Those things travel fast in the design community. By this afternoon, 2 of her scheduled consultations called to postpone. Lorraine took a breath. Raymond, I've been watching her scheduling system through the shared calendar access we retained from the guarantee documentation. She's been in 3 different law offices this week. Not her regular corporate attorney. Different names, none of them on her usual contact list. My stomach dropped a few degrees. What kind of attorneys? One is a family law specialist. One handles asset protection trusts. The third I'm still identifying. Lorraine's voice dropped slightly. Raymond, a woman who is managing a business crisis, goes to her business attorney. A woman who is managing an exit goes somewhere else. I walked out to the back porch when I hung up. The evening had gone cool and the marine layer was coming back in off the water, and I stood in the dim garden light, with my hands in my jacket pockets, and thought about what Lorraine had just told me. Brecken was preparing to leave. Not the country probably that was dramatic in a way that wasn't her style. But she was preparing to leave the situation, to separate herself from the wreckage before it finished falling, to get her assets protected and her position secured before Callum understood what was happening. Thaddeus called at 9:40 that night. I was in the study trying to read something that wasn't a financial report. Raymond, he said, I pulled the Brecken Coal Interiors operating account transactions through the guarantee documentation access we retained. It gives us visibility into the shared company accounts. He paused. Over the past 6 days, she has transferred $67,000 from the company operating account into a personal account, registered in her name only. The personal account was opened 2 weeks ago. I set my book down on the desk. 2 weeks ago, I said. She opened the account before the credit freezes started. Yes, Thaddeus said. Before First Pacific called. before the showroom notice, before any of it became public. He let that sit for a moment. She knew the freezes were coming. She moved money out of the company before the walls came down, which means she has been planning this exit longer than this week. She's cutting Callum loose, I said. That's what the money movement suggests. Thaddeus's voice was measured, but there was something underneath it. The same controlled tension I had heard the morning he called me at 6:14 about Pell. Raymond, there's one more thing. I had a contact reach out to her personal attorney, the family law specialist, discreetly through a mutual connection. Apparently, Brecken has been asking about the division of company liabilities in the event of a divorce. Specifically, she has been asking how to document that her husband was the primary decision-maker on financial matters she claims not to have understood. The cold that moved through me then was not the marine layer. It was something deeper. She's building a paper trail, I said. She's going to say Callum ran everything, that she didn't know. She's going to say she was a victim, Thaddeus said, the same way Callum tried to say he was a victim in your kitchen. I stood up from the desk, walked to the window. The garden was dark, just the shapes of Margaret's rose bushes and the outline of the cedar fence I had built with my own hands. Somewhere in San Francisco, Callum was living in a borrowed hotel room with $14,000 in a bank account, no car, no company, and a wife who was quietly transferring the last of their shared money into an account with only her name on it. He didn't know yet. He was going to find out soon. And when he did, whatever remained of the partnership between them was going to come apart in a way that neither of them would be able to control. I had not caused that. I wanted to be honest about that. I had dismantled the scaffolding. But what was falling was what they had built themselves. I have always been a light sleeper. Margaret used to tease me about it. Said I slept with one eye open, always listening for the business, always listening for the house. After she was gone, it got worse. The house makes noises at night that a man alone learns to catalog the cedar settling in the west wall. The particular creak of the third porch step, the way the marine layer sounds different against the windows than regular rain. I know every sound this house makes. That Friday night, I was not asleep at all. It was not quite 2 a.m, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water and the kind of exhausted wakefulness that comes from too many weeks of carrying too much weight. I had been sitting there for an hour, not reading, not thinking about anything in particular, just existing in the quiet with the lamp above the stove turned low. Then I heard the side gate. It was a soft sound, the latch lifting the hinges, giving their small complaint, but I knew it the way I knew every other sound in this house. I did not move immediately. I sat with my hands around my glass of water, and I breathed very carefully, and I thought about who had a key to the side gate. I had never changed that lock. I had told myself it was an oversight. Sitting in the dark at 2 a.m, I understood it was not an oversight at all. I picked up my phone from the table and opened the security camera application. I had upgraded the system in 2023 high-resolution night vision, motion-activated 8 cameras, covering every angle of the property. I had not told Callum about the upgrade. He still thought the system was the old one from 2015, the one with 3 cameras and a blind spot along the east side of the house. I watched the screen. Callum moved through the side yard with a small flashlight, and the careful, hunched posture of someone who believes they are not being watched. He was wearing dark clothes. He had his jacket collar up. He went directly to the back door, the one with the old lock I had also never changed, and he worked at it for less than a minute before it gave way. My chest felt like someone had reached inside and was squeezing something that wasn't meant to be squeezed. I pressed my free hand flat against the table and held it there. On the screen, Callum moved through the back hallway and into the study. I watched him sweep the flashlight beam across the shelves, across the desk, down to the floor. He went to the corner where the safe had always sat, the old combination safe I had bought in 1994. The one Callum had tried to open as a teenager on a dare from a friend and failed. He knelt in front of it. He had brought tools. I could not see them clearly, but I watched him work, and after 11 minutes, I counted the safe door opened. I stood up from the kitchen table and walked slowly down the hall to the study. I did not turn on any lights. I sat in the armchair in the corner in the dark, and I watched through the doorway as my son knelt on the floor of my study and rifled through the contents of my safe. He pulled out the folder. The 2019 trust draft, the superseded version I had placed there deliberately, still in its original manila envelope, looking exactly like what he hoped it was. He opened it. Leafed through the first few pages. He was not reading carefully. He was looking for something specific, some clause or account number or provision that he thought would give him purchase on a situation that had already slipped entirely beyond his reach. He found what he thought he was looking for. He tucked the folder under his arm. He stood up. And in the moment before he turned to leave, his flashlight beam swung across the room and caught the empty armchair in the corner where I was not sitting, because I had gone back to the kitchen the moment I heard him moving toward the door. He left the way he came. Sidegate. The soft complaint of the hinges. Then quiet. I sat in the kitchen for a long time after the sound of his car faded down the street. My eyes were burning. My hands, when I looked at them on the table, were perfectly still, and that stillness cost me more than anything else had cost me in this entire season of expensive things. At 6:15 in the morning, I sent Thaddeus a file. The security camera footage from 11:47 to 1:53, accompanied by a single line of text, add breaking and entering, and theft of documents to the file. The documents he took are the 2019 trust draft, superseded and legally void. He has what he came for. It won't help him. I made coffee, stood at the kitchen window. The fog was in the deep kind that erases the water entirely and makes the world feel like it ends at the garden wall. Thaddeus called back at 7:45. Raymond, I've reviewed the footage. Good, I said. Are you all right? I looked at the garden, at the fence I had been repairing all summer, at the rose bushes Margaret had planted in 1999, and that I had kept alive for 6 years without her to tell me what I was doing wrong. He took a folder full of documents that expired 6 years ago, I said. He broke into his father's house for paper that's worth nothing. My voice came out steady, which was the best I could manage. No, Thaddeus, I'm not all right, but I'm going to be. What happens next is going to determine whether he figures out the same thing before it's too late. Thaddeus was quiet for a moment. Not the uncomfortable kind of quiet, but the respectful kind. The kind that a man of his particular experience knows to offer when there is nothing useful left to say. He'll read the folder, he said finally. When he realizes it's the old version, he'll look for another door, I said. And Brecken will help him find one, until she doesn't. I did not cause what happened between Callum and Brecken in the 3rd week of September. I want to be honest about that. I had dismantled the scaffolding that held their arrangement upright, but the rot inside the structure was theirs, built in load-bearing there from the beginning. When it finally gave way, it gave way the way all honest things eventually do not, because someone pushed it, but because it could not hold its own weight any longer. Thaddeus called me at 10:12 on a Tuesday morning. Raymond, he said. Callum is here. He has been in the waiting room for 40 minutes. He does not have an appointment. A pause. He looks different than I expected. Different how? He came without a phone on the table, without a folder, without anything. Thaddeus's voice dropped slightly. He asked to see you. Not me. You. I was in Monterey halfway through a cup of coffee I had been nursing since 7. I set it down. "Give me an hour," I said. "Put him in the conference room. Get him water. And Thaddeus, don't tell him I'm coming until I'm in the building." I drove up the 101 with the windows cracked and the radio off, the same way I had been driving every difficult road this year, and I thought about what Thaddeus had said. Without a phone. Without a folder. In 7 months of this, Callum had never arrived anywhere without an agenda. Without a recording device or a prepared speech or a manila envelope full of something he thought he could use. The fact that he came with nothing told me more than anything he was likely to say. Thaddeus met me in the lobby at 11:40. "He's in conference room B," he said, walking with me toward the elevator. "He's been there for an hour. He asked for water, drank it, and has been sitting with his hands on the table since." He paused at the elevator doors. "Raymond, I should tell you something before you go in. Last week, on your instruction, I had a copy of the Brecken email chain, the November correspondence Lorraine found forwarded to the attorney Callum retained in early September, his new counsel." "Yes," I said. "I want to be clear that you directed me to do that." "I did," I said. "He deserved to know the truth before he walked into whatever was coming. That's all." Thaddeus nodded. The elevator opened. Callum was sitting in the conference room, exactly as described, hands flat on the table, a paper cup of water in front of him, that he had finished jacket on, despite the warmth of the room, looking like a man who had been awake for several days and was no longer bothering to pretend otherwise. His face when I walked in was not the face from my kitchen in July. It was not performing anything. It was just exhausted. Stripped down to something I recognized from a long time ago. I sat across from him. I did not speak first. This time he was going to have to find the words himself. "She cleaned out the company account," he said. His voice was rough at the edges, scraped thin. $67,000. Into an account I can't access because my name isn't on it. He pushed a printed bank statement across the table. "I'm still listed as co-director on the company. She forgot to remove me. I saw the transfers when I logged in on Sunday." I looked at the statement. The transfers were exactly as Thaddeus had described to me 2 weeks ago. "And there's an email," Callum continued, his jaw working as he said it like the words had edges. "From her to an attorney, asking for documentation showing that I was the primary decision-maker on all financial matters over the past 18 months. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, for a moment hard enough that when he dropped them, his eyes were red at the corners. "She's building a case that everything was my fault, that she didn't know what I was doing, that she was the victim." He said that last word with a kind of hollow disbelief, like a man who has just heard his own argument used against him and cannot quite process the symmetry of it. "Your attorney received the email chain from November," I said. "The one Brecken wrote to her mother about the marriage being a business arrangement, about you being easier to manage than she expected." Callum's face changed. Something cracked through the exhaustion, not rage exactly, but the sudden acute pain of a person who has just had confirmed what some part of them already suspected and had been desperately hoping was wrong. His throat moved. "She wrote that," he said, not a question. "In November of last year, 8 months before the wedding." He looked down at this table, his hands curled slowly inward. "I thought—" He stopped, started again. "I thought we were doing this together, that we were— I don't know what I thought." His voice broke on the last word just slightly, and he pressed his lips together hard and breathed through his nose until it steadied. "I gave up everything for that." The words landed in the room and stayed there. I felt the pain of them. I felt it the way you feel a cold front move through not just on your skin, but in your chest and the back of your throat. My son was sitting across from me telling me that he had chosen a woman over his own father because he believed they were partners and she had been running him from the beginning, and I could not fix that. I could not reach across the table and take the weight of it off him. Some pain is not transferable. Some lessons have to be absorbed through the skin. Callum, I said, listen to me carefully. You need an attorney. Not Thaddeus, he represents my interests. Your own attorney, independent of everything connected to me. The attorney you already retained in September. Call them today. He looked up. His eyes were wet at the edges, but he was holding it. Barely. Are you helping me? I'm telling you what any father would tell his son when the situation is serious. I said, get a lawyer. Protect yourself. Is that all you're going to give me? The question cracked something in my chest, but I held it closed. For now, I said, yes. He nodded slowly, picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. At the door, he turned back. Dad, he said. The parcel, the broker. I know you know about that. Yes, I said. Are you going to press charges? I looked at him for a long moment. At this person I had loved since before he could walk standing in a doorway, at 36 years old, with nothing left. That depends on what happens next, I said. He left. I sat in the conference room alone and the quiet was very heavy, and I let it be heavy because I had earned the right to sit with it. Thaddeus appeared in the doorway 3 minutes later. Raymond, he said, the competency petition. I've been monitoring the court filing status. His voice had that controlled urgency quality again. It was amended this morning. The petitioner of record is no longer listed as Brecon Cole. He paused. It has been refiled under Callum Hale's name. He is now the formal petitioner in a case he knows nothing about. I was not invited to the hearing on October 3rd. I was the subject of it, the man whose mind was allegedly failing, whose assets allegedly needed protecting from himself. So I sat in a coffee shop 2 blocks away, with a cup of black coffee I never touched, and waited while Thaddeus sent me updates every 30 minutes. The first call came at 10:31. They've started, Thaddeus said. Brecon's attorney opened with the competency argument. She's citing the asset freeze as evidence of erratic judgment. A pause. Callum's attorney objected immediately. He's claiming Brecon filed the petition under Callum's name without his authorization. My hand tightened around the cold coffee cup. How did Brecon react? She leaned over and said something to her attorney. Then she looked at Callum. Thaddeus's voice was careful. Raymond, whatever she said to him across that table, his face went white. The second call, 11:04. Callum's attorney submitted the November email chain. Thaddeus said it quietly like a man delivering a verdict. The one where Brecon tells her mother the marriage is a business arrangement. The mediator read it. The room went very still. My eyes burned. I pressed my fingers against them briefly. Outside the coffee shop window, San Francisco moved past in its ordinary, indifferent way, people walking a bus, pulling from a stop, pigeons on the sidewalk. None of it knew or cared what was happening 2 blocks away. And Brecon? I asked. She counterfiled immediately. Security footage of Callum leaving with the safe documents. The forged power of attorney from the web transaction. Company emails where Callum directed staff to falsify revenue reports. Thaddeus took a breath. Raymond, everything she submitted proves she had knowledge of all of it. The emails are copied to her account. She's dismantling him, and she doesn't realize she's dismantling herself. The third call came at 12:23. The mediator called a recess. Both attorneys are in the hallway. It's not going well for either of them. A pause. Raymond Callum just asked to withdraw the petition. He stood up in front of the mediator and said he was never the petitioner of record, and his name was placed on the filing without his consent. Thaddeus's voice held something I hadn't heard in it before, a quiet, careful respect. Brecken said, "Callum, don't." He looked at her and said, "You filed this under my name to sue my father." Then he sat back down. The coffee shop felt very small around me. "How did it end?" I asked. "They walked out separately," Thaddeus said. "In the hallway she said she was protecting them. He said there was no them anymore." A pause. "Raymond, between what they each submitted against each other, we now have a complete evidentiary record. All of it is on the court file. They built the case themselves." I set down the untouched coffee, looked out the window. "Thaddeus," I said, "set up the room at Rosewood Estate. Same venue, same main hall. Call the investors, the family, the bank representatives, and send Callum an invitation. He deserves to be in the room." November in Carmel by the Sea arrives without announcement. The fog comes in earlier, the light goes flat by 4 in the afternoon, and the Pacific takes on a color that is less blue than it is simply gray and final. I had chosen the date deliberately. The 5th of November. 5 months to the day since a woman in a bridal preparation robe set a manila folder on a table and told me to sign my life away. I arrived at Rosewood Estate at 7 in the morning, 2 hours before anyone else. I walked through the main hall alone. The same floors, the same high windows, the same way the morning light came through at an angle and made everything look more significant than it probably was. In June, this room had held 500 people and a string quartet and flowers that cost more than most people's monthly rent. That morning it held 14 chairs, a projection screen, and the accumulated evidence of a very long, very expensive education in who my son had become. I stood at the head of the table, and I thought about Margaret. I thought about the way she used to say that the truth, when it finally arrives, always feels smaller than you expected, because by the time it gets there, you have already been living with it for a while. She was right about that too. The attendees arrived between 9 and 9:30. 2 representatives from the investor group that had funded Callum's startup, who had traveled from San Francisco with expressions that suggested they already suspected what they were about to hear. A representative from First Pacific Bank, accompanied by their legal counsel. 3 family members, Margaret's sister, her husband, and a cousin, who had been at the wedding in June and had heard Callum announce that I had abandoned them. Thaddeus and Lorraine sat together on one side of the table, close enough that I could see the folder Lorraine had prepared sitting in front of her, 2 inches thick, every page sourced and dated. Callum came in last. He was alone. He wore a gray jacket I did not recognize, something new or something borrowed, or something that belonged to a version of his life I didn't have visibility into anymore. He sat at the far end of the table, without looking at anyone, put his hands flat on the surface and stared at the projection screen, the way a man stares at something he knows is going to hurt him and has decided to face anyway. I was grateful for that. More than I could have said out loud. I did not use notes. In June, I said, 2 people in this building gave me a choice: sign over the foundation of my life's work or lose my son. My voice came out steady, which cost me something. I chose neither, and what I found in the months that followed is what I am going to show you now. We went through the evidence in sequence. Thaddeus advanced the slides and I narrated, and the room got quieter with every item on the list. The audio recording from Desmond Grant, my voice, Brecken's voice, Callum's voice, the ultimatum spoken plainly in a carpeted hallway while a string quartet played 40 feet away. One of the investors leaned forward when it played, pressing his fingers to his mouth. Callum's signature on page 47 of the folder, dated 3 weeks before the wedding. Signed in advance. signed in planning. The November email chain, Brecken's own words to her mother. The marriage as a transaction. Callum as an instrument. The 18-month timeline. I did not read it aloud. The room read it in silence, and that was sufficient. The wire transfer to Dr. Warren Pell, $15,000, 14 days before any evaluation was scheduled. The bank representative made a note on his legal pad and did not look up. The recording of Brecken offering Desmond Grant $25,000 for his silence. The security footage of Callum entering this house at 1:47 in the morning, moving through the dark in clothes chosen not to be seen. The forged power of attorney submitted to Marcus Webb, the signature wrong by one small degree that anyone who had seen my handwriting enough times would recognize. The company account transfers $67,000, moved before the walls came down, into an account with only one name on it. When the last slide went dark, the room held a silence so complete that I could hear the marine layer moving against the windows outside. I looked at the investors first, then the bank representative, then Margaret's sister, who was looking at her hands with the expression of a woman absorbing something she had not wanted to know. Then finally at Callum. He was looking directly at me. His jaw was tight enough that I could see the muscle working. His eyes were red at the rims. He did not look away, and I did not look away. And in that exchange was every year of every complicated thing between us, the ball games and the calculus, and the $3 million, and the side gate with the lock. I never changed. On the day of this wedding, I said, 2 people gave me 2 choices. Today, I also have 2 choices. I can continue spending money and silence to cover what they became, or I can stop and let them carry the full weight of what they chose. My throat tightened once. I breathed through it. I choose to stop. One of the investors stood up quietly and buttoned his jacket. The bank representative closed his notepad. Margaret's sister finally looked up, and the expression on her face was not judgment. It was grief, the particular grief of someone who loved a family and is watching the shape of it change permanently. After the room cleared, Thaddeus placed the amended trust document in front of me. The final version after 3 drafts since April. No direct inheritance for Callum. A housing fund for elderly people abandoned or exploited by their own families. A limited monthly allowance available to Callum conditional on verified employment, full repayment of misappropriated funds, and completion of a structured financial accountability program. I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake. I signed my name, the real one, the one that had built 40 years of things that lasted, and I set the pen down on the table and pushed my chair back. I walked out through the main hall of Rosewood Estate, past the high windows, and the morning light coming through at its particular angle, and out into the November fog. The last thing I built was a door that only my son could open. Whether he would, that was no longer mine to carry. I am not a perfect father. I want to say that clearly, because this story could make me sound like one, and I am not. I waited too long to have the honest conversations. I wrote checks instead of sitting down and saying the hard things. I confused providing for my son with preparing him, and by the time I understood the difference, the cost of that confusion had become very high for both of us. If there is one thing I would tell any parent listening to this story, it is not to do what I did. Do not let love become a habit of avoidance. Do not wait until the situation demands a revenge, dad moment to show your child who you actually are. Family justice should begin at the kitchen table, not in a courtroom. I believe, and I say this as a man who has lived long enough to mean it, that God does not give us children to possess. He gives them to us to prepare. The greatest act of love I ever performed for Callum was the hardest one I stopped catching him. This story is about family justice in its truest form. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet, expensive, necessary kind. And I hope that any revenge dad out there listening understands that the goal was never to win. The goal is to stop losing myself in the process. Every family has a version of this story. What version are you living? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to be here for the next one, subscribe. You know where to find us. Thank you for staying until the very last word. The stories you'll hear on this channel contain fictional elements crafted for the purpose of reflection and understanding. If this kind of storytelling isn't for you, there's no judgment in choosing something else, but if you're still here, we're glad you are.